models. As you know, our neighbor to the north has recently changed how they distribute liquor. I would say the results on that, to put it charitably, are mixed. Our neighbor to the south appears to have a relatively private distribution system that's just taxed. We talked about some of the other states that are out there. You've got various flavors of controlled systems, including my home state of Pennsylvania. But I don't know that there's any model, and I wouldn't tell you that I'm deep enough to see this, but certainly I don't think the OLCC people would say there's a model that they would embrace implementing as is. So I think that's one of the things that would have to be part of the overall strategy. Any other questions?
I'm just curious. I don't know if it's relevant or not.
Yeah.
So we have a smaller number of stores per capita in our state compared to others. What are our overall liquor sales relative to other states? Does that, in other words, having fewer stores, does it have an impact on sales?
Consumption is kind of in the middle of the pack nationally. So if you look at the 50 states, Oregon ranks kind of in the middle on consumption. But in those 50 states, you of course have certain states like Utah, for example, which has relatively low consumption, and you have some states that have relatively higher consumption. So I'm not sure what to make of that quite yet, but if you look at the blunt instrument numbers, middle of the pack.
It might also be interesting to look at the other state monopoly states and see how we compare in terms of the cost of the distribution model. I mean, if in fact we're low, then that may be less of an incentive to look at a rework, but if in fact we're high, then that seems to indicate there's opportunity there.
Yeah, I think you could argue that you can optimize a controlled system, but I think the bottom line is a controlled system is not going to be optimized versus a commercial system. So the question, I think, is if you believe you want to use the operating model to manage alcohol consumption, for example, or develop your indigenous distilled spirits industry, I think you can do that. But if you said, is this as a business optimized to generate resources? The answer I would say is no. So even if you look at the cost structure relative to other controlled states, that's not going to tell you it's optimized. So, but I don't know the answer of how much money there is in this because I haven't done the work yet.
And I read something recently that said 1 in 8 adults and 1 in 4 adults under the age of 30 has a technical drinking issue. And if we're going to do anything to advance, drinking, I hate to put it that way, but any activities that try to grow this industry, it seems like it almost necessarily pushes it out of government hands and into private hands. Not that that makes it better, but I guess I'm asking you, do you see that as such an issue that it would have to come out of government hands?
I'm sorry.
Just the whole.
Ask me again.
Just the whole notion of steps we might take to grow this business, which necessarily translates into a higher level of drinking. Would you see that in being interpreted publicly as a need for that to come out of government hands? Therefore, we're talking about selling.
Okay, I'm not sure. If you're asking the question about would you need to consider the implications of maybe more drinking and making a decision whether you wanted to sell or not, I think you should definitely consider it. The question that I think, and this is one of the reasons why I think this decision has to be made by the governor and elected officials, is that there's a lot of philosophical questions about this, which is, do you use don't misinterpret the comment here, commercially inefficient operating model to drive the public policy decision around alcohol consumption? So if you use another analogy, we recently have legalized marijuana consumption. Would you say, I want to have an inefficient marijuana distribution system in Oregon to minimize marijuana consumption? Is that the way you would do it, or would you do it a different way?
Probably a different way.
Probably. But that's a decision that our elected officials are going to have to figure out.